Hi everyone, good morning. Thank you for joining today. We're really excited to have you with us to talk about cybersecurity in the Middle East, specifically around red teaming tactics, techniques, and procedures within the region. My name's Ellis Williams, and I lead our cybersecurity sales at LRQA in the GCC region. And I'm joined today by Bobby Spooner, who brings deep expertise within red teaming around the world. We have got a live Q&A in the chat, so if you've got any questions, feel free to pop them in there. I'm also going to pop my contact details and the details of Bobby within the chat as well. So if you want to contact us after the webinar, you're more than welcome to do so. And today we're going to guide you through today's discussion. As you can see on the screen, we're going to be sharing practical insights from what we've learned on the ground, and we're also going to answer your questions in the live Q&A chat as well. So yeah, let's get started.
Thanks, Ellis. Hopefully everybody can see me on screen. So as Ellis said, I'm a principal consultant at LRQA. I'm in the red team. My role is attack manager, so it's my job to oversee these red team engagements across the globe, really, and make sure that we are risk managing things, making sure we are getting the most out of these engagements for our customers. We just go to the next slide. So packed agenda today for you all. First thing I'm going to do is look at the Middle East threat landscape. We'll then hover over to the red teaming to build resilience. That'll give you an idea of why we red team and how we red team. We'll then take a look at the current modern sophisticated threats, what they're doing, really. There'll be a few surprises in here as well. Then finally, got lots of experience in lots of organizations and how they defend against these threats. So we've got a good idea of what looks good, and I'll talk to you about how we build that defense and how it's really important this comes from the board level downwards. So the aim of the call today really is to understand how organizations like yourselves can improve your cyber resilience against the latest modern threats. And there's a bit of a lexicon on screen. A lot of you will understand these terms already, but just so we're all on the same level. Red team, that's effectively us. We are simulating threats. We're offensive security experts, and we perform these simulated cyber attacks on your organization to test your resilience. The blue team effectively is your defensive teams. That might be an outsourced provider who runs your SOC. It might be your internal teams that perform GRC functions. That's the blue team. It's everybody involved in defending against these threats. Threat actors are the bad guys, the individuals or groups that are posing a threat to your organization. And threat intelligence is a really important phase in TLPT, threat-led penetration testing. It effectively gives us up-to-date information about threats that are realistic and likely to attack your organization. And as we go through the slides, we'll see how we use threat intelligence to frame scenarios that we actually play through during our red teams. Next slide, please. Ellis has already touched on this. I think there's a question box if you want to upload any questions during the presentation, and I will seek to answer those at the end. So what's going on in the Middle East? If we head over to the next slide, I think key thing here is we're all aware that this region is something of a financial powerhouse, okay, and that is a double-edged sword, really. We've got this rapid acceleration in digital transformation, but that comes with its downsides, right? So we're seeing this rapid tech adoption, governments, businesses embracing AI, cloud, smart city initiatives. The problem is that outpaces security readiness. The more digital services we have, the more endpoints, the more cloud environments, the more involvement from third parties means an expanded attack surface. And threat actors are taking advantage of this. We combine this with the region's strategic location and assets, makes it a really high value target for criminals and also state sponsored actors whose goal is effectively espionage. There's some really interesting stats on screen, but I really want to draw you to that one on the top right, actually. There was a survey done, and that survey was performed by CPX. 92% of surveyed organizations in the UAE experience at least one successful cyber attack. I think that's quite frightening. It really does put a full stop on that challenging protecting against cyber attacks when so much rapid digital transformation is happening. So what does this look like in terms of how attacks play out? So some recent events on screen. We can see from the examples here, we've got various targets from various bad actors, but they all result in an adverse impact, whether that's financial, reputational, or operational. And we'll try and frame this against the CIA triad as well: confidentiality, integrity, availability. So first one, top right, that's a hospital. So the attack has actually threatened to leak 4 terabytes of stolen data. That's going to be sensitive, personally identifiable information, and that really exposed some serious gaps in segmentation and in particular outbound traffic monitoring, being able to see what leaves the network. And this is one of the most severe healthcare related cyber incidents in the UAE today. You can see here that's a massive breach of confidentiality. The second one, the crypto exchange, again, that's exposing some critical financial systems, certainly caused reputational damage, but also clear operational impact. Again, that's an availability issue as well, right? And the last one, the hacktivist group called Anonymous Sudan. So these attacks temporarily disrupted online banking services. That's availability. Um, we're thinking that there was no data stolen, but that operational impact is significant enough to prompt emergency responses and public advisories. Just really underscores the vulnerability of some critical financial infrastructure. And we're hoping this accelerates a push towards real-time cyber resilience testing, particularly in the financial sector. So we're going to head to the first poll question now. And just thinking back to the previous slide and the statistics that I shared with you, I'd like you to look at the question: how likely do you think it is that your organization will face a targeted cyber attack in the next 12 months? What I'm saying here, this is not just internet radiation and background attack. This is targeted attacks, whether that's spear phishing, whether that's somebody trying to hire an insider into your organization. That's the sort of thing we're talking about here. Nice to see the results coming in real time there. Some of you may have even faced a targeted attack already this year. Yeah, so the majority are saying likely or very likely. And it aligns to really the stats that we shared previously. Okay. So we're facing these modern sophisticated threats. It's really important that we try and build resilience, okay? And there is a lovely pyramid that I've got on screen here. And I like this pyramid because it's a great example and a great way to portray breadth versus depth, okay? So what this pyramid is not saying is that there is no place for vulnerability assessments or pen testing. Really important to have these, by the way, to ensure holistic resilience. But what it's saying is the most and best way to test your defensive from a depth-based perspective is the top there: threat intelligence-led testing, or red teaming. Okay. Threat intelligence-led testing, as I've said, has us simulating the sophistication of your most likely threat actors. Okay. So it's a realistic scenario-based attack that, most importantly, the blue team are not aware of. And that gives you an indiscriminate way to understand what your resilience is. And again, most importantly, it's underpinned by that threat intelligence led angle. So it's real world. We're taking into consideration the attacks that are occurring against organizations like yourselves. So this has gained ground really the last decade or so and has been embraced by a number of regulatory authorities across the globe, particularly in the finance sector. So the next slide has a table that I've pulled together of all of the TLPT framework. So not to get confused here, we see the reference to threat-led penetration testing, but this really is red teaming. I don't like the terminology. I don't like the use of pen testing because for me, pen testing is something you deliver against applications, business systems. A threat-led pen test is, in my view, a red team, a red team that's supported and led by threat intelligence. And as I mentioned, the global regulators, the regulators in the UK over 10 years ago, realised that something needed to be done to understand and improve the resilience of systemically important financial institutions. So you may have heard of CBEST. That was the first TLPT framework, and that is effectively something of a founding father and has led to other regulators across the globe adopting their own frameworks. So this is in the face of rising sophistication of threats, APTs, state-sponsored actors, and it helps organizations move from that checkbox compliance to actual real operational resilience. We're aligning security testing with the actual threat landscape. Not only does it identify gaps in your ability to protect, but it's also testing that detection response angle. That's really, really important. And as I say, we're seeing this expand beyond finance as well into energy, healthcare, and government. So previously, I spent over a decade in cyber, but I've spent half of that time in public sector in the UK. So I've been involved in a lot of the government-led red teaming in the UK, and that was all effectively taking the good learnings from CBEST and transposing them across into a government-led framework. And I've done that from the blue side as well. For those of you with presence in Europe, you may have heard about DORA, the Digital Operational Resilience Act, and that's an EU regulation designed to enhance digital operational resilience of entities in the region. And that covers everything from risk management to incident reporting to third-party oversight, but it also mentions the need for resilience and testing, and that's where TIBA comes in. The TIBA is and can be used to support that requirement of DORA. TIBA is used various countries across Europe, but we'll also notice that there's only one framework in the Middle East, and that's FEER in Saudi Arabia. We'll maybe touch on why that is the case. But before we do that, I just want to state that there are some main similarities across these 7 frameworks, and that's that most importantly, they're all about real world simulation of threat actors and attack techniques. They're all regulator owned. So the firm, the bank, the institution that's being tested is effectively reporting this to the regulator so they can see and understand what the organization's resilience is. And the most important one for me and for everybody really is that last line around strengthening cyber resilience. That's ultimately the reason why we do this. So I mentioned fear, and we'll have a quick look at that on the next page. So this was created in 2019, so it actually has been around longer than a lot of other frameworks. And the requirement from the regulator, which is the Saudi Arabian Monetary Authority, is for systemically important banks to effectively conduct an ethical red team every 3 years. Okay, probably wondering why we only have the one in the region. So we know that the Saudi Arabian Monetary Authority is one of the most mature and proactive regulators in the region. But we also know that other areas in the region, UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, you have strong initiatives, but we haven't formalized that yet into TLPT, into regulation. We're seeing many countries in the Middle East with multiple bodies, national certs, regulators, which does make it harder to unify frameworks and implement these sorts of threat-led red teams or penetration tests. But again, you'll see there from the points on screen, similar characteristics to CBEST. It's about creating realistic and likely scenarios, trying to focus those attacks on the critical key assets, the important business services in the institution, and get a view on actually have we got the controls to protect. If we can't protect, can we detect and respond to a bad actor in our environment? we go on to the next slide, please, there's a few things that are effectively prerequisites when we are performing this sort of advanced resilience testing. I know I mentioned I don't really like the term penetration testing for red teaming, but that's what a lot of the frameworks call it. As I mentioned on the pyramid slide, it's focused on depth, not breadth. So we are not, as a red team, going into your estate trying to find all the vulnerabilities. It's what VA, it's what pen testing's for. We are trying to play out a realistic, likely path to compromise of your critical functions. Now that comes with it some risk, and it's my job as an attack manager to manage that risk. The last thing you want to do in a firm, in an institution, in a retail company is knock over key systems and cause adverse impact ourselves. So we risk manage these engagements. We do this on a daily basis. We have a control group, a small control group that is aware of the test. We perform risk assessments against any risky actions that we plan to take. Most important thing is when we get to important assets where if there was adverse impact, there would be real adverse impact in the organization. We really tailor the actions that we carry out. So an example is if we get to a mainframe in a financial institution, we don't need to execute code. We don't need to exfiltrate information. We'd much rather get an SME in the room with us, maybe perform a screen share, and just convey the level of access, the level of privilege we've obtained in the network. And that then is enough evidence to confirm that we could perform compromise of that system. If we ever need to evidence the fact that we could maybe perform a ransomware attack across the estate or mass exfiltrate data, we can do that and we will do that, but we'll do it against synthetic data. Okay. Really important this is done in production. Lots of organizations don't like it taking place in production, but it has to because that's the most realistic view. And in terms of threat intelligence, well, this is where aligning the appropriate threat actor comes into play. So we need to monitor threats and profile them to understand who's targeting your sector. Is it a nation state whose motivations are espionage, political gain, economic advantage? These are highly skilled groups that are creating tools, running 0 days. Is it a cyber criminal group who are often a bit louder, more opportunistic, but their motivation is ransomware, financial gain, fraud? Hacktivists, we saw the stat around hacktivists earlier on. These are organizations seeking political or social causes, promoting agendas, publicizing issues. One thing that's come into play recently are insider threats. These are either disgruntled insiders, they may have been passed for the latest promotion, or it may have been a nation state threat actor having somebody hide in your organization. We're seeing that as well. We're seeing nation states having individuals supported by AI, which is a bit of a sneak peek into what's coming in the slides later on, but getting them hide into an organization, they ship their device. As soon as they get their laptop, it's loaded with malware. So when we understand at a high level, based on your organization, who is targeting you, we can play out a realistic and likely scenario. And this is what the scenario looks like on screen. Okay. Now in a TLPT and a regulated red team, we'd have 3 or 4 different scenarios across the most realistic and likely attacks. And like a story, there's a beginning, a middle, and the end. The beginning is how does the attack start? So is that an insider? Is it phishing? Is it a drive-by download or is it supply chain? The simulation in the middle is really important. That's why we have this golden thread. And again, part of my job is making sure that our offensive security experts don't go off track when they are simulating the threat actor in question. They're not all of a sudden bumping up the sophistication or lowering it because they think it's going to give them a way to get success. We need to maintain that golden thread of sophistication. Okay. And ultimately, the end goal is those objectives, or are those objectives at the bottom there? What does that look like? Is it exfiltration of intellectual property? Is it being in a position to deploy ransomware across the estate? what do we want to do that would have the most impact? And that's what the regulators are wanting to see. That's what the likes of the Saudi Arabian Monetary Authority, the Bank of England in the UK want to see when we are setting up these scenarios. And again, just as a reminder, these are all taking place in production. These are all being done without the blue team's knowledge, without anybody else in the organization knowing it's happening, which makes risk management a really, really important focus for us. One, to maintain engagement integrity, to make sure that we're not giving up the stealth of the red team, but two, to make sure we're not knocking over any of your key systems. That's what we do not want to do. So just an idea of what some scenarios could look like. Phishing is a prominent one we'll talk about in the coming slides. During a simulation, we're attempting to get execution of our implant. Again, we are working from a semi-persistent remote access Trojan typically. We call it an implant. We've got to find a way to get that into the organization. Once we do, whether it's phishing or an insider, we've got that command and control. We want to get persistence. We want to then look for opportunities to escalate our privileges in the environment, look for maybe lateral movement opportunities. And all of this is done with the goal of getting closer to your key systems, your crown jewels, your assets. I think we have the next poll question on screen. So, has your organization conducted threat-led penetration testing or similar red teaming in the past 2 years? Please, you could put your answers in. That would be great. Excellent. Nice spread there, really, across the answers. So, organizations obviously seeing the value, performing that multiple times a year, which is great. And organizations that are actually planning to, which is great to see as well. And hopefully, those that don't have plans will see the benefit and the value of it during this webinar, and maybe it then comes to the forefront. But we'll see. So we're looking at attacker trends and tactics now, and I've talked a little bit about threat actors. So I thought it was important just to talk about who we're defending against really. Now, on screen is Lockbit. You're aware that in May this year, the group's infrastructure was breached and defaced. So they're not the dominant force that they once were. But I thought it was really important to talk about Lockbit because they are really one of the trailblazers when it comes to the double extortion method. So these criminal gangs and similar groups like Ransom Hub operate on an affiliate model, and that means people can jump in and use their tools. There's a whole customer service portal. You log in on the dark web, you get access to their tools, and you can use their infrastructure. But the key thing here is this double extortion, and it's getting the customer to pay. So what the gang will seek to do is obtain a foothold, usually via social engineering or obtaining leaked credentials. Once they're in, they won't just deploy ransomware first. They'll look to identify key information assets, sensitive information assets, whether they're in shared folders, whether they're in file sharing systems, SharePoint, but they'll identify those and exfiltrate them. So they've got hold of your information and then they will perform the ransom. So it's we've got your information. We'll publish it if you don't pay us. Oh, and by the way, a lot of your infrastructure is now locked up by ransomware. It's a fairly aggressive tactic, and it does become quite loud once the ransomware has been deployed. But up to that point, they are trying to maintain a level of sophistication and stealth so they are not spotted. As I mentioned, they are not the dominant force they once were, but it's tooling and most importantly, the methodology continues to exist and influence that ransomware ecosystem. We saw in the UK, you may have seen it in the news, the retail attacks that happened a couple of months ago. And then just to talk about another threat actor that is active in this particular region, we've got APT 34. Again, this group does use social engineering to obtain a foothold and will often exploit vulnerabilities such as those in Microsoft Exchange. The key difference you'll see with an APT, an advanced persistent threat, particularly those that are supported by a state or state sponsored, is that sophistication level is a little higher. And we see that plays out in creation of their own exploits. They might jump on a 0-day, for example, the Windows kernel privilege escalation from last year. They'll build tooling around that and exploit the 0-day before it's patched. And that allows them to operate in the environment and evade detection. And again, talk about differences. The key here is not so much financial fraud, it's about espionage. So it's espionage, not extortion. Okay. So just before we go on to the next slide and play this video, we've talked about phishing. Phishing is still one of the most prominent social engineering vectors. I thought it would be useful to actually show you it's not a live example, but it's an example in our lab of a phishing technique that we've employed the last couple of years really, that's really given us a lot of success in simulated engagements, and it just shows how a threat actor can leverage legitimate tooling to obtain a foothold. So let's play the video. There is no sound, and I'll talk through it. So the top left is the victim's inbox. They've received an email with a link to a survey. So we want to coerce the user into clicking. And the tool we're using here is the same that you'd use if you've got a smart TV, for example, and you're logging into Netflix. We're using a legitimate Microsoft authentication flow. Effectively, what we are doing is coercing them into registering a device on our behalf. So we sent a phishing email with a link to a survey. We're logging in through the authentication broker. Effectively, we've got our server that's asking them to add a computer to the domain. Our server sees this new connection from this user. We've started the flow, and on the right there you can see the server is going through the process of registering the machine on behalf of the user. Most importantly, and this is the kicker here, we're enhancing these credentials with MFA. So you see the 45 there, that is all legitimate Microsoft MFA. And by obtaining this, we are bulking up the credentials that we've obtained with MFA. And at the end, we'll obviously present them with a satisfaction survey because we don't want them to think that they've been phished here. We want to keep up legitimacy. Bottom left, you'll see we've got their credentials. What we can do with those access tokens, which, as I mentioned, they're enforced with MFA. MFA is a great control, but when we can utilize it here to strengthen our own access tokens, we can use those and import them into the browser via an open source tool. And hopefully you'll see very shortly that we've got access to that user's M365 services. So typically we'd be trying to fish with attachments with malicious links to download payloads and give us command and control on the workstation. Here it's slightly different. We're using a known authentication flow, that's the device code flow in Microsoft, to register a device on the victim's behalf. They don't know we're doing this, but that's what we're doing. We're an adversary in the middle. We're grabbing hold of their credentials. We're able to grab these credentials, replay them in our browser, and you'll hopefully see very shortly what that means for us is we're able to access any cloud-based service that's using those tokens. So you'll see the browser's loading here. This is our screen now. So we've got the poor victim's information. Windows is trying to sign us in. Oh, we've already got the token, and here we go. We've got the user's app dashboard. Okay, user is totally unaware of this. We've got access to the app dashboard, and ultimately, all those applications there that the user's been granted rights to, we can access as Henrietta. So we're here clicking through into their Outlook. Things that we can do at this point, we can internally phish. We don't have to spoof. We can actually be and act on behalf of Henrietta and maybe email other individuals to try and gain further information, maybe try and extract some credentials, look into SharePoint. If this user's got privileged access to certain folders in SharePoint, we can utilize that as well. So just a way that's really gained ground the last couple of years using authentic Microsoft authentication to leverage a foothold in an organization. Now, probably thinking, how do you stop this happening? There's all sorts you can do within conditional access. We can use device code flow and disable that. And we can restrict the ability for users to register new devices. So we can talk about that, but there are ways around this. Obviously, there are defenses, but just a novel way that we are gaining ground. And AI is also helping, right? AI, it wouldn't be a webinar in 2025 without a mention of AI, right? But we are seeing that AI is being used to further augment these kind of social engineering attacks. So the top two examples there, we've actually used in engagement, so vishing and phishing. So we managed to use this against a large bank. So we found somebody online that was producing content. They were doing like a TED talk on YouTube. All we need is a few minutes of footage. We're able to extract that, clone their voice, and this particular organization had a help desk that employees could call and use their voice as their password. So we could script our attack and say, my voice is my password with this individual's voice, and get the user's password reset. But definitely an impact on availability there. From a phishing perspective, the first thing we want to do when we're phishing is really be able to land in an inbox, of course, bypass filtering. But the second thing is coerce employees. How do we give an employee a reason to click? We've seen lots of SaaS tools there where we can effectively make really legitimate looking training videos, for example. So one thing we might do in an organization, we might see a new initiative and we might create a fake training video for said initiative with all of the corporate graphic identities of that organization in the video just to enhance legitimacy. It takes minutes now to do that. You're going back 5, 10 years, it's taking days, weeks to produce this content. Now it's just been super powered. We can produce it in minutes and make our social engineering attacks look more sophisticated. It is lowering the barriers to entry for less sophisticated threat actors. And the last one I've talked about, I've touched on already, and this actually happened to a company, or a security awareness company, and great for them to come out with this around how it happened. But that was where they recruited a fake worker from North Korea. That user had used deepfakes and AI enhancement of photos and IDs to get a role at the company. And as I mentioned, what typically happens here is they get a role, workstation is sent to an address somewhere, and immediately that workstation is loaded with malware. And that's an example of an insider being hired, a malicious insider. It's also, if we go on to the next slide, more generally, a real nightmare for people hiring. We've got a video to play in a second, but before we do that, this is getting harder and harder. The video that I'm going to show you in a minute, like it's clearly on the left, it's clearly somebody with a face filter. We're talking like Snapchat level filters from 5 years ago. So it's quite obvious. Since then, and more recently, it's getting a heck of a lot better. So not only are organizations using doctored documents enhanced by AI, they're also using things like the tool on the left. Now, this is just a Google away. This is an AI-powered interview co-pilot. So if you're having a remote interview, effectively, it's transcribing your answers for you and hearing what the interviewer is saying. You can see some of the organizations that people have been hired into using this tooling. So not only have you got a way to doctor your IDs, you've got a way to superpower an interview, maybe give answers that you wouldn't have known yourself. And now, again, this is a very rough example, but this live streaming deepfake is something that is coming to prominence. So let's just play the video. The first
Your
on the left,
avatar is
you
like
won't hear.
kind of weird. Like, are you using something to like change your camera view? Can you take your hand and put it like in front of your face to like cover it partially? No, no, it's not a joke because I can see that you're using some kind of software. If you don't do it, we'll end the conversation right now. Thank you. No, like put it like this, in front of your face. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, so you could probably tell that the individual on the left was using deepfake. And as I say, it's got a heck of a lot better since then, and that is portrayed in these real world examples. So the individual, the CFO, was reached out to, or the individual was reached out to by the UK-based CFO, finance worker, requesting a transaction. That's obviously going to raise suspicion. So, like anybody would, they want to just to verify the request. So the finance worker joins a multi-person video call to verify the request. And on the call, he sees a whole room of individuals that he knows that appear to be those individuals, including the CFO, giving instructions. Off the back of that, they authorized 15 separate transfers to accounts controlled by the attackers. This is a real jump in sophistication. So this is multi-person deepfakes, not just one-on-one impersonations, multi-person deepfakes using voice and facial mimicry. And there's a couple of examples there on how that impacts on people's personal lives as well. So not meaning to scare you too much in the face of these evolving threats, how do we build a defense? How can we mitigate some of the risk here, right? Well, there's a few key themes that I want you to understand. Again, a lot of you will already have these and understand these themes and be aware of them. Complete security is unobtainable. We can't eliminate the risk. And this is a journey. This is a continuous improvement. If you've got an ISMS, if you're certified to ISO, you'll know this is all about plan, do, check, act. It's continuous improvement. In the coming slides, we'll talk about why it's not just an IT problem and the importance of trusting and verifying. So, in the light of everything that we discussed, hopefully I've reinforced the need to build wider resilience. There's a few fundamentals here. Firstly, I believe that cyber risk is strategic. So, this should be in the top 5 strategic risks in every organization's risk register. I know we've just talked about AI, but typical vectors of attack still exist, right? So you'll see 4 icons there on the screen. Insider threats, humans are still biggest risks. Phishing, the email, payloads are becoming less prominent, but as you've seen by the video that I shared, credential theft is well and truly in. Supply chain threats, these are really hard to protect against. You think Log4j, Log4Shell, Move It. These are things that, because you are dependent on maybe a particular supplier software or third-party software, when that's backdoored, you wouldn't know. It's about then what can you do to detect that and respond to a threat actor in the environment. There are common traps that we observe when building resilience, and I want to talk to you about some of these traps before we go on to the next slide. So what is the tooling trap? Okay, so we see tools like CrowdStrike Falcon, excellent EDR tool in my opinion, one of the most prominent we come up against. But we see organizations buying these tools and just inherently trusting them and never testing them, never improving them, never getting away from the out of box default configurations. They think that we'll buy the shiny tool, it's AI, machine learning enhanced, it will do its job and we won't have to do anything. That could not be further from the truth. Okay, so that's the tooling trap. The second is the compliance trap. Again, certifications are really important. Things like 27001. I'm a 27001 lead auditor. I see the value in an ISMS, but I've also seen how organizations can superficially obtain ISO by scoping their statement of applicability really, really narrow. So they'll say, right, we've got a certification, but it might be against one admin building in a certain area. People will use this obviously to share with their customers to show that they take security seriously. But the real value in certification and compliance and accreditations like 27001 is if you live and breathe them, if you actually carry out the plan, do, check, act cycle. It's not just about getting a certificate and thinking that you are good to go. It's about understanding what the requirements are and bolstering that compliance certification with things like assurance testing. The exercise trap is the third trap. It's great having a team, it's great having resources and tools, but untrained teams can't respond if you never drill scenarios. We talked about some of the scenarios. These are the ways that we see threat actors get into organizations like the ones that you are coming from. Let's try and drill some of these scenarios, understand what the response looks like. And the last trap is the people trap. The people are often blamed when things go wrong, but actually the most powerful defense we have is a trained individual that can, for example, spot a phishing email, report that promptly. It's a first line analyst. Again, these folks are often blamed for missing things, but it's a first line analyst that can see a particular TTP playing out. So it's really important that we invest in people. And as we're building our defense, we're thinking about those 5 NIST pillars on screen. And it's not just about focusing on protect. Protect is important, but firstly, identify, have we got visibility of all our assets? Have we applied commensurate protection to those assets? I think you'd all agree that we'd apply additional protections and layers of defense and segment particular assets, crown jewels, really important strategic assets, more so than, for example, a file sharing server somewhere. We have to be tailored in our approach. And again, protect and respond. We can't protect against everything. Complete security is not obtainable. So can we detect somebody moving through the environment? And then most importantly, can we respond? Can we act quickly to eradicate the threat? Are our playbooks clear and repeatable and tested? And in terms of recovery, when it does go wrong and the worst case scenario does happen, can we recover quickly and get back to business in a time that doesn't result in the organization losing out massively? Just a few key points and lessons learned really over the past decade from my perspective. And I thought it was useful in the next slide really just to talk about why it's important that this is really a top down and embedding this at board level. So boards need to understand that cybersecurity is more than protecting data. It's really important actually that our CISOs and our security representatives and our general board do get a little bit technical. They need to understand cybersecurity risk in the same way that they probably understand financial risk or health and safety risk. They should be asking questions of the cyber and IT teams and actually holding them to account. They're really getting interested in, well, how do we defend ourselves against phishing attacks? What do we do with our privileged accounts? How do we ensure that our suppliers and partners are secure or maintaining a commensurate level of security? How are we authenticating? These are the things that maybe our board should be asking questions of and holding people to account on. And what we see from a regulatory perspective, whether it's SAMA in Saudi Arabia or the Bank of England in the UK or OSFI in Canada, they want to see, and this is really useful if you are having a regulated test in the future, they want to see governance arrangements. They want to see strategic cybersecurity risk management, an understanding of dependence on certain legacy systems, for example. We want to understand how we are mitigating risks and do we have threat intelligence that's allowing us to understand and identify what our most likely source of attack is. They want to know that the critical systems that underpin the financial backbone of the region are protected and that they are available and that they can be brought back if the worst does happen. Penultimate bullet there, it's not just about preventing, protecting. Does your organization know how to detect and respond? How are we testing our assurance to assess this? Are we doing red teaming? Are we doing focused pen tests? So in light of that, it's just some key areas really of focus and investment on the next slide. it's really important that you have a risk appetite set, and that needs to be threat informed. So that's where threat-led assessments against the organization's most likely attack scenarios can help us understand what our posture is, what we're willing to give up. Strategic and long-term planning, as we know, and as I've said, security is a journey, it's not a destination. So align to a framework, align to ISO, align to the NIST cybersecurity framework, but be proactive, prioritize what's important. Culture, again, this is about changing behaviors and not just technology. A story, a bit of a war story is we see on most engagements examples of really bad cyber hygiene. Okay, that's people like devs, admins, just dropping plain text credentials in SharePoint. It seems totally crazy, but it happens. People do this, but if we give people and provide them with a platform that does reinforce culture, we can prevent this sort of stuff. Tools will only go so far. So changing that culture, we see actually does, in a slower form, move that needle. The supply chain and your outsource risks are really important. We're often seeing organizations now outsource critical functions to third parties, but we're not holding them to the same level of scrutiny. Really important that we do that. And remember, the supply chain is not just technology, software, it's APIs, it's individuals remoting into your environment as well from a third party. Continuous detection and response is gaining that true situational awareness. It's about that plan, do, check, act cycle. It's all the loop, isn't it? Let's do incident response planning, but let's exercise it and let's continue to learn. And from my perspective, one of the most important things, and again, I've talked about traps and organizations that don't want to exercise, but I've found that testing does give you that continuous assurance, particularly when we're talking about red team and threat-led red teaming. The way that we are continuously adapting and understanding how we are in the face of modern sophisticated threats. So we have got the last poll question. If I'm not mistaken, we are not sharing the results of this one, but it's just something that you can answer, please, for us. Is your organization planning to invest in new or enhanced cybersecurity in the next 12 months? Okay, thank you. So just one final slide really before we take some questions. So we discussed over the last 50 minutes the landscape, the threat landscape in the Middle East. It's a target. It's a target because of that rapid digital transformation and its strategic importance. We've talked about why red teaming builds resilience, the importance of these threat-led, realistic tests and production environments. We talked about how the modern threats are bumped up, are powered up by AI. I've talked about how we build that wider defense. And I just wanted to end really on why I think that continuous insurance and that testing till you have confidence is so important, because one, we're not just trusting, we are verifying, we're confirming that our controls, not just from a protect perspective, but from a detect and respond perspective, are working. We're exercising blue teams. The blue team and a red team engagement should not be aware. They should not know anything is going on. So everything they see should be treated as if it's a real attack. We can use it if we're doing red teaming every year to actually measure improvements in maturity as well. So it's a very effective vehicle from that perspective. We can use it against our critical assets. So we then focus our actions on objectives on those key systems. They're the systems that, if something were to go wrong, would cause that real adverse impact to the organization. As I mentioned before, it's realistic. There's only a small group of people in the control group that are aware of this happening, which allows us to deliver that indiscriminate view of your resilience. And it's nice to have certification to demonstrate to customers that you take security seriously. It's nice to say that you're pen testing and performing vulnerability scanning. Everyone does this, or everyone should be doing this. What we do see, though, is that not everybody does red teaming, as we've seen from some of the poll results. So why not try this? Hopefully the value's been explained by myself, but it's also a nice way to demonstrate to customers that, yeah, we are concerned about the most sophisticated threats, and we are performing these sorts of exercises and assurance tests to make sure that we can protect, detect, and respond. So that's it from me for the main bulk of the content. I think we have some questions, or we should have some questions that I think Ellis is going to read out for me.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions in the chat. If anybody else has got any questions, feel free to add them. I will read a couple of them out to you now, Bobby. So the first one is threat-led penetration testing sounds very resource intensive for some smaller organizations without large budgets. Do you provide, or what advice can you provide around scaled down versions for us?
That's a great question, and you are right. It is typically more expensive and more resource intensive than typical pen testing. But we see lots of organisations in this position, probably outside of the scope of a regulatory TLPT exercise, but see the real value in red teaming. I think my suggestion here would be a single scenario exercise over a few weeks where we actually start in the assumed breach position. The benefit here is we are delivering more value across a shorter time frame. So we're not going to spend those 2 or 3 weeks just trying to fish and trying to get in. We're actually starting as if the fish has been successful or an insider has been coerced, because that means actually we're testing layers of defense inside the network instead of just providing a snapshot of assurance on the perimeter. I think this is the way that most organizations in that position do it. Any more?
Awesome, thank you. Thank you. And the next one is in many of the scenarios that you showed, many of the attacks came through phishing. We are already doing phishing awareness training. What other defenses are effective to prevent this?
That's actually a nice segue from the previous question, actually. So, yeah, like phishing is still the most prominent social engineering vector. User awareness is really important, so it's great that you're doing that. We know that threat actors have months, if not years, right? And all it takes is one successful phish. So I found over the past, I suppose, 5 years or so being involved in red team, the most effective controls are those that limit the ability for an attacker to act once that initial compromise has happened. So what does that mean? It means so if we maybe successfully land an implant on a user's laptop, if that threat actor is on that laptop but unable to move, so even if they're able to escalate locally, become system on that device, if they're stuck isolated on that machine because there's proper network segregation, they can't move. It's like we are stuck on an island and we can't advance towards target. So that is stuff like network segregation. That's stopping communication between workstations. Do workstations need to talk to workstations? Does every workstation need to talk to every server? To limit those comms, but also limit what applications can run on a device, what code can execute. So that's application allow listing. So note, these are often the hardest to implement. in large corporate IT estates, totally aware of that. But there's no reason why you can't start small and take a more granular approach. And another key message here on that is you're not going to prevent everything. You're not going to be able to, again, prevent every single bit of malicious code from not running. So that's where it's important that we've got some visibility across the entire attack chain. So be able to respond, be able to ensure that you're consuming the right source of telemetry so that what you can't protect, you can at least detect and respond to. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Bobby. The next question says, Bobby mentioned that resilience testing involves production systems. How can we minimize operational risk during these exercises?
Yeah, customers, clients, organizations get a little bit nervous when it comes to testing in production. And that's where that risk managed approach is really important. So we'll have a control group. That is a small group of individuals from the red team, from the organization. And we'll use that to communicate our activities on a daily basis. In terms of the payloads and the malware that we use, they've all got kill switches. So if something happens in the organization that's not related to us, or if we need to stop at any point, we can stop. We can kill our implants. We also use guardrails on our payloads and on our malware to make sure that it will only execute in the customer's organization. So imagine we're sending phishing emails to people and we're trying to coerce them. So we might say, "Oh, we've got a real nice job for you here." They'll probably send that to their personal email address because they don't want to respond on a corporate email. The last thing we want is to break any computer misuse laws and have that individual open that on a personal device and have it execute. So these are the sorts of things that we do technically to safeguard. I mentioned before, like if we get access during our test to a production mainframe, for example, as part of the objective, we don't need to run any code or execute commands. We can get into a position where we do a screen share, we get a subject matter expert from your organization to jump in with us and say, right, we're here, we've got this user's access, we're in their context, this is what we can see. Is that enough evidence to confirm that we could do X, Y, and Z? So we are tailoring our risk treatment as we go up through those asset tiers.
Awesome. Thank you. The next question is around supply chain risk. So it says, supply chain risk was highlighted as a major challenge. What practical steps can organizations take beyond standard vendor questionnaires?
Yeah, it's again like vendor questionnaires are pivotal. We need to use them to get a snapshot. As I mentioned on previous slides, it's about not just trusting, verify and assure. So that's where we need to move to this a more collaborative, proactive approach. And that might include contractual obligations for security testing that mandates that our suppliers do perform testing. And where possible, now this is quite tricky and it can be challenging, but if we are performing a red team exercise or a purple team exercise, and the supplier has maybe stores or manages a critical component, get them involved. Like we need to test that they can stand up to this real world pressure. So that's something to consider. Get your suppliers involved or have them in scope. Again, we can do it and maybe add an individual into the control group so the rest of the supplier team is unaware. That's great.
Yeah.
But around supply chain risk, it's not just about, as I say, suppliers having outsourced functionality. Think about the Log4j, the Move It breach, backdoor software, PyPI repos that are compromised. It's being able to also identify that, well, we can't protect against this. Have we exercised enough to understand that we can detect and respond if somebody is moving through the network as well? Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Bobby. We've
No
got
worries.
quite a lot of questions in the chat, but I'm just conscious of time. So a lot of the questions are around sharing the presentation. So I'll reach out to you via email and we can arrange that to be delivered. And then there's a couple of other questions as well. So what we can do is we can share an email with the presentation and the key themes as well. So yeah, thanks very much, Bobby, and thanks everyone for joining. I hope that was helpful. And yeah, looking forward to speaking soon. Cheers.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.